The Meilong series is the latest budget series from Cubing Classroom, and I generally feel that the cubes are quite nice, but I would say that the 5x5 is actually my least favorite cube so far. The cube measures 62mm across, which is the size of the Mo Yi Hua Chuang, and also the size of the Qi Wu Shuang, which is a cube that I currently don't have. The cube has a very tight, stable feel. The cube holds its shape very well even without magnets, and it doesn't flex or wobble around in your hand, even if you spam TPS quite a lot. The forward corner cutting of this cube is generally quite nice. You can do slightly more than one piece, or maybe even up to like maybe 1.2 or 1.3 pieces forward if you force it, and if you want to cut effortlessly, like one piece is quite effortless. As for the inner layers, you can also cut at around one piece. The reverse corner cutting is actually where this cube starts to get slightly annoying, but I'll go through that later. The Meilong 5 is not the fastest 5x5 out there, but it definitely has a good amount of speed, and combined with its extremely lightweight, makes the cube very effortless to turn, and I would say that the weight to friction ratio is comparable to the Wu Shuang, except that the Meilong is a little bit faster and a little bit lighter. The turning on this cube is very smooth, but in its own unique way. It's different from the our GTS cubes where there is a gliding, smooth feel. You have a little bit more texture to the plastic, although the mechanism is very smooth, and it kind of reminds me of the gun cubes where the mechanism on the cube also makes it feel that it's very smooth, but you can actually feel that there's a honeycomb pattern inside the cube. But in the case of the Meilong, it's not a honeycomb pattern, but more of a frosted plastic kind of feel. I would say that this like so-called frosted texture is more of a money-saving design because the plastic processing is a little bit less complete, if I'm not wrong, and it helps to make the cube more affordable, which is what it's meant to be. It's supposed to be a budget cube. For cube defects such as pops and deforming lockups, I would say that the Meilong 5 gets none of that. 5x5 has come to a stage where these problems almost don't exist anymore, and there is even a 6x6 and a 7x7 on the market right now where the resistance to such cube defects are either equal or near 100%. Another thing I want to point out about the Meilong 5 is even though the mechanism is super hollow inside, as the hollow design does not reflect itself in the turning at all, and the cube still feels very solid and very well put together, and the cube actually doesn't make loud clacky noise like other hollow cubes in the past. The one factor that kills the Meilong 5 for me is the reverse corner cutting. 2x1 reverse corner cutting is quite limited, and so is the outer layer. And because this cube comes stock without magnets, sometimes the layers can misalign slightly and the cube doesn't corner cut enough to save you. Compared to the 4x4, if such misalignment occurs, the cube can actually sometimes cut right through and it actually saves quite a lot of trouble, but in the case of the 5x5, unfortunately, I don't really get that as nicely as I got it on the 4x4. 2x1 reverse corner cutting involves the wing riding against the T-center, like that. But on the Meilong 5, however, this is how the wing and the T-center fit together, and you notice how the two rounded surfaces rub against each other when you reverse corner cut on the outside. It looks good from this angle, but if you look at it from the inside, it actually doesn't look as good because here it's rounded off on top, but it's actually quite square at the bottom, and like the rounding is decreased here. Likewise for this area here, you can see how round the piece is on top, but below it's square. And this really ruined quite a lot of my solves. The lack of reverse corner cutting and the lack of magnets had caused me to lock up a lot, and in the solve that you are seeing here, the lockups caused me to lose my place in the COL L. I had to backtrack and redo the entire L. I also had quite a bad slip up during PIL, and the timing is way off compared to my normal standards. The Meilong 5 itself has a rather interesting mechanism. So the most obvious feature is the double anchor, but in the Meilong 5, this anchor is just totally huge, and because of that, the neighboring piece has to extend like super far out, and because of this, it's actually very difficult to plug pieces out of the cube. And another feature is you can see how minimalistic the root is. And comparing the Yisu V2M, you can see that this piece here is quite thick at the bottom, but if you look at the base of the Meilong 5, it's actually very thin as like a standard 3x3, if not thinner. And another part of this cube that's very thin is the wing, but if you look carefully, the corresponding gap here is actually a lot thicker and you have some empty space. While magnetizing the Meilong 5 may get rid of its problems, there are already two other very good budget 5x5s, the Little Magic 5 and the Yichuang V2M. both of these already come factory magnetized and they shouldn't cost that much more because they're budget cubes after all. And I wouldn't really recommend magnetizing your Meilong 5 unless you are a DIY person who enjoys the magnetization process, or you specifically want a 62.0mm 5x5 and you think 62.5 is just too big for you. But personally, I prefer a larger 5x5. I actually use a 64mm cube as my main now, although I would say 63 or 62.5 would be the ideal size for me. And apart from the size, the Little Magic 5 already seems to offer what the Meilong 5 can offer, plus it has a magnet job already done. And even if I were to magnetize the Meilong 5 and compare it with the Little Magic on fairgrounds, I still think that the Little Magic will come on top. And for this, I'm going to use the Wushuang as a standard of comparison here because it's also a crunchy cube with harsh turning. The Little Magic actually feels like an improved Wushuang. Specifically, it feels like an Wushuang that has been spring compressed, magnetized and set up by an expert. Plus, it has some Ultron GTS characteristics thrown into it as well, such as the speed and maybe a slight bit of that soft, silky gliding feel. The Meilong 5 on the other hand just feels like a watered down Wushuang. Most of the performance factors like the stability, the speed, the resistance to pops and the deforming lockups are very comparable to the original Wushuang, but the plastic just feels harder and cheaper in the Meilong 5 and the reverse corner cutting falls short enough to kill quite a lot of my softs. So the Meilong 5 is quite a nice cube to turn and handle, but I can't really solve it very fast, and I wouldn't really be recommending it because two better budget 5x5s exist. And in fact, if I had to pick a new main right now to replace my Weichuang GTS, I would actually go with the Little Magic